My name is Matthew Toth. I'm the founder of C3 Technology Advisors. We are a 12-year-old consulting firm based here in Michigan. So we'll do a couple introductions. So Joe and then Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Joe Mauk with C3 Technology Advisors. I am a SD-WAN engineer, as well as a unified communications and contact center engineer.
I'm Nick Dell. I was a IT manager at a tier 1 automotive in Michigan, and a big SD-WAN SASE enthusiast. Been talking about it, researching it for over 4 years. And I think the cool thing was, it was almost 3 years ago that Joe and myself were doing an early on panel as a customers, both from a customer's perspective, that Matthew brought us together 3 years ago. So that was really cool. And here we are all again talking about how it's changed and come forward.
So the whole thoughts of this was, we do a lot of work in the automotive sector today. And Nick, you were one of the early adopters of SD-WAN in the automotive space. And I think there's still a lot of organizations out there that still haven't adopted SD-WAN, still have MPLS. And wanted to start this conversation off with talking about your journey and how you came to the solution that your former employer has today.
Yeah, so we were MPLS kind of a hybrid with firewall clouds, LTE backup, and we ran pretty much a 24/7 manufacturing operation, primarily to Ford. Ford has, really strict EDI, ASN requirements. We had a cloud-based ERP, MES system, so you couldn't ship or produce with your internet being down. So that was a big problem. So our MPLS provider was one of the the big names out there, and they sold us something that worked, but when it came to dealing with problems, trying to get it done, it just I couldn't get the level of expertise and urgency to get things solved. And it was always the local LEC problem. It was never, something that they did wrong. Transparency wasn't there. So, I came across, 4 years ago about, SD-WAN, and I'm like, oh, what's this? Researched it, learned a lot about it, went through all the different players out there, which was probably about half of what it is now. And weighed it all out and just figured out, and then ran across a couple and really weighed it. And then it took me a good 6 months to convince my CFO that, this was the path to move forward. I mean, and when I started looking, we still had 2 years, 2 years, a little more than 2 years on our MPLS 3-year contract. But it was something that, was so new that we had to spend extra time researching it and doing it. And the great thing was that, I could get a POC, and put it in and test it and put it to the test, make sure that, hey, is everything going to work the way they say it's going to work? Is this going to solve my business problems? And we got a POC, we did it. Beautiful thing is we were building a new manufacturing facility. And, I went out to my MPLS provider and said, hey, I just want to, add this on. And they're like, oh, you just want to add it on. You've got a year and a half left on your contract. That's going to be like $15,000 a month for that one circuit. Let's sign a whole new 3-year deal. And I'm like, they weren't living up to my expectations already. Why did I want to get down that path again? So, that's where we got the PLC came in, ordered a couple of internet circuits. Some of them came in pretty quick because, you can get cable and Wi-Fi links and other things, WiMAX links a little quicker in the cornfield sometimes than you can getting fiber brought in. Fiber, sometimes the builds are 6 months. So that's why having that lead time of, like a year and a half out on starting to plan it, you can actually, work that in and take it to your benefit. So we did that. We brought up the one site and tested everything out, got everything fine-tuned, and we realized this was what was for us, and ordered all our circuits, and then started our cutover.
What I find, and one of the things that you talk about in there is the cost. So, and I don't like talking about the cost of SD-WAN too much, just because I think there's so many more benefits. But one of the things that we see, and I think is consistent with something that you've seen as well, is you had about 10 or so sites. Some of our clients range from 10 sites to a couple hundred sites, and you always have some of these sites that are in the middle of nowhere. An MPLS connection is thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for something that's horribly underpowered. And you're like, well, wait a minute. There's an ISP from Joe Blow ISP, and I can get a 100 megabit internet connection for $500, but I can't use that through my MPLS. So oftentimes, what we're seeing on our side is a cost reduction because you take that bottom 10% of sites that have such high costs and low bandwidth, and you're able to move those something else. Is that consistent with something that you've seen as well?
Definitely. I mean, we 5 to 20 times our bandwidth on cutting over to SD-WAN versus MPLS, and with that, I also had a 30% reduction in costs, right then and there, and that was over 3 years ago. Come full circle, a lot of that cost was construction for fiber, bringing it in. I just, before I recently left, a couple months ago, I signed a new contract on those same existing services and reduced it down another 20% on those ones because the circuit's build out costs were already put in. So, and the bandwidth was not neat. I had plenty of bandwidth because I some sites went from 5 megs to 50 megs, and I'm still, here 3 years later, the cost that I'm paying for those circuits is a third of what it was from the MPLS provider. And some of them, they could say, oh no, the local LEC in there only offer a T1. And I'm like, the local LEC's delivering your T1s by fiber, but they didn't have those agreements.
Joe, I'm curious if that's consistent with what you had seen, and before you came to C3, you held a similar position to Nick at another company. I'm curious to hear what you think as well.
Yeah, it was really the same experience. I mean, we were an MPLS shop for North America and Mexico, and honestly, we were starving for bandwidth. Switching over to internet using SD-WAN, we had the capability of really allowing our employees to egress locally, and that really was the biggest benefit for us. We backhauled all of our internet for inspection, and once we put in an SD-WAN solution, we coupled that with Zscaler, at least in our instance we did, and just by having all of the traffic egress locally, the times to have things done, Nick, you talk about shipping, we had issues with going out to FedEx and UPS and taking 3, 4, 5 minutes for transactions, and now all of a sudden that was 10 seconds. So the efficiency of our employees was a cost that you really couldn't put a price on because we didn't understand the value of that until we put it in and saw it firsthand. But Nick, I did want to ask you a question. So you talked about just being able to troubleshoot MPLS, working with the providers, and then the provider has to work with the LEC. There's a lot of underlying issues there. What other benefits or what other business drivers did you guys have to make that switch? Obviously, you talked about 6 months to convince your management team that this was something they should do. Were there other business drivers that you guys said, listen, this is what we have to take into account if we're going to do this?
Yeah, so speaking of this, I used to have a metric that I had to deliver to executive management every month, showing our bandwidth utilization, when I started, of like where we're at, what's our peaks and everything else, because our MES and ERP system was in the cloud, and that would those bandwidth throughput problems would cause slowness, and our provider couldn't QoS that properly. And it was a big struggle. They could never get it done right. And so that metric, we went over to SD-WAN, and I'm like, I can start reporting on it, but because I was able to drop costs by so much and times our bandwidth, I stopped having to report on that. And my team loved it because we could now go into the single pane of glass, see where we're getting packet loss, see where we're getting jitter, checking the last mile monitoring. We're getting alerts, when there is jitter and things like that, so we can look at it, so we can proactively open tickets with the carriers. and send, and the QoS was easier, a lot easier to manage. I mean, you put in, URLs of where you're going, and the software now reads all the packets and knows where it's going. It's not CLI code, so it was just that much easier, and my team could do it, and it was empowering.
Nick, I got a question for you. You talked about working with Ford as an example and having strict requirements around EDS and other capabilities. Can you speak to how an SD-WAN solution could benefit those type of connections to suppliers or vendors like that?
Yeah, so our EDI requirements are, especially, Ford is one of those. If we don't have it in 30 minutes, we're going to ding your rating, and no one wants ratings dinged. So it was always, and being in the cloud with our MES ERPs, if you can't get to the cloud efficiently, it's not going to happen. Your data is not going to get there, and they're holding up the truck, or the truck, you get truck fees because the truck stayed too long. I mean, there's all those other soft costs that don't ever get considered in there. And when we went to SD-WAN, those complaints and those things went away. But also with our EDI, our IPsec tunnels went to a cloud POP instead of one of our data centers. So something that's fully resilient, something that's, has all, that's why these big, huge data centers exist. They've got security guards, cages, generators, cooling,
not dependent on one circuit.
Right, and yeah, they have like 4 or 5 different circuits and 4 or 5 different router failover components. I mean, that's the 5 nines is what we're all after, and that it makes it possible.
I want to ask actually make a question and a comment. You kind of talked about a few minutes ago. I want to expand on a point. You said we can take back power, and I was thinking about that. I'm like, that I get it. It makes sense. So if you think about it, if you have a new plant, you might get from your provider, it might be 6 to 9 month build out. Well, you can't do anything until that point in time. So they have that power there. Oh, you want to make a route change? Well, you're locked out of your router, so that might take anywhere between 24 hours and 4 days.
Or the contract you purchased only allowed you three a month or something like that, and then there's fees on top of it depending on
right. You want to make a QoS change? Well, you have to make that QoS change within your environment, but then also at a provider level. So maybe talk for a moment like how other automotive companies can take more ownership and more power back to how their network runs and be able to accommodate for shifts in the business and make those changes quickly versus your traditional MPLS network.
Yeah, so I mean, there's different options, and I talked about this on a LinkedIn article that I published, I think, over 2 years ago on this, like some simple steps. You got to make the decision of, do I want to, co-manage, self-manage, or fully manage. There's those differences in there, but choosing the experts to go with who know, this is their only product that they do. MPLS providers, that's not the only thing they do. They do a ton of different things. So getting around to, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. Want to repeat that, Matthew? The one thing that you wanted me to answer on that?
Yeah. Just that's were you able to take back that power and be able to run your own network versus having to go through the provider every time you had a new site or a new change or something had to change in the network?
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, we did. I mean, that was the beautiful thing is I actually empowered my team and they became more ownership of the network instead of just, oh, carrier problem, I opened a ticket, and yeah, the site's down. I'll call them, but I'll call them and they'll say, okay, we'll give someone to call you back with an ETA. Now we had control of those things and we could actually give executive management, the plant, the manufacturing facility, actual information, going, what, this is a hardcore outage. The beautiful things is one of the local LECs that we signed deals with, I praise them to this day as their knock was so, you know, I never had to call them going, hey, what's the status? Because every 15 minutes I would get an email saying, you know, engineer's been dispatched. The digging crew is on their way. You know, it's deeper than they thought. You know, it's taking a little bit longer. All right, splicing has started. I mean, I got that detail when MPLS providers, I had zero information, and that transparency was just not horrible. I mean, here I'm getting yelled at by my internal customers trying to do their job, and I have no visibility. Having that visibility was huge.
Yeah, I'll say that as well. I mean, we will help clients deal with trouble tickets, and on MPLS networks, sometimes it's, oh, the circuit's back up. Well, what happened? Well, I mean, a couple hours had gone by, and that chain of communication, that whispering in one person's ear and then the next person, it didn't ultimately get to the client, and then all of a sudden the solution's instantly resolved. You're like, well, how do I know I won't have this in a day from now, or a week from now, or a month from now? So yeah, very interesting. Joe, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to make a comment, and honestly, that was one of the biggest benefits I had when I went to SD-WAN, was decoupling myself from a single provider. So we now had the capability to look at each individual geographical location, pick the best internet carrier for that area, and then bring in their circuit. So being able to use the LEC and having that direct communication versus going through a global or national partner that's going to provide MPLS was night and day. It really was. And yes, you're going to have more bills if you don't go through an aggregator, but just being able to use that local exchange carrier and use their services directly was definitely a huge benefit. And really, it's probably one of the best parts of SD-WAN is being able to really free yourself from any one provider and be able to switch out circuits as you see fit and really not ever notice the difference.
You can fire a provider. You can fire them if they're underperforming and put someone else in if you've got those options. And that's the beautiful thing. Right before I left, I mean, I got a cold call from a provider where I've been looking for a secondary carrier instead of LTE, and they're like, oh yeah, we're bringing fiber in the area. Oh, but we have WiMAX right now. Let's get you hooked up, and then in 6 months to a year we'll have that fiber. Now I have another provider in that area that's not a big company name where I'm just a number to them. I actually matter to them.
Hey Nick, we've got some.
That sounds like something you would say, Joe.
Nick, we got some questions that came in.
All right.
Somebody wants to know, in your opinion, what's the best way to manage SD-WAN? Self-manage or have somebody else fully manage it?
I mean, it all depends on the organization, how you're staffed and everything else. I mean, as an IT leader, you've got to look at that and your risks and outweigh it. For me, I'm always been a self-managed person and really take the control. But the solution that we had was kind of, co-managed a little bit. We didn't have a DSE or dedicated, engineer to us, but we had, support, which was focused and directly on this product only. And, my team could take ownership and could do all the rule changes because I had smart people that were capable of doing it. And I didn't need to send them to school. They didn't need to get certifications. I mean, I did rule changes and I have none of that, certifications. So that was the beautiful thing of it.
Yeah, I want to jump in there. Let me make a quick comment on that as well. I think one of the reasons why we as an organization see more co-managed is because you as a customer aren't going in and doing CLI configurations and such. You don't have to really worry too much about just completely breaking your edge device because everything is, for the most part, just drag and drop. So I think most of our clients are saying, we would like to manage this for the most part, but on nights, weekends, certain instances, hey, like it's good to have another set of eyes on my network if something, goes awry. Joe?
Yeah, I was really just going to echo that. I also chose a self-managed platform, and unfortunately, when I left my last company, there was nobody there to manage it with to take my place. Having a co-managed solution would allow my previous employer to have that to fall back on. So it still gives you that capability of doing the day-to-day changes. But if you need that expertise, it's not we'll do a shared desktop and show you how to do it. They can go in and do it themselves. So it's really just it's a security blanket that's a nice to have, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's why I chose a provider that was their only business model, was SD-WAN SASE. I mean, if they don't do this right, they're out of business, and then I'm in a bigger. But they're doing it well. They're becoming, they had the vision of SASE, and that's what I loved.
So we got another question. What does a migration from MPLS to SD-WAN commonly look like, and what pitfalls or shortcomings should we be aware of?
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends on your organization and how complex you are. Whether you're distributed or everything have centralized. I mean, that really makes the difference. But SD-WAN and SASE can handle it all and even give you, the best of both worlds. I think, Joe, we were talking about this, where you're like, you don't have to, if you don't want to get rid of your MPLS and you want to reduce the bandwidth to save some money there, you can still keep it if you really want to do that. But we didn't do that. We'd rather have, different carriers. But some of the pitfalls, I mean, things to work out is definitely, test it, get a POC, get it in, work out your critical issues. The funny story is, this was such a long time ago. I put in the POC and the vendor I selected actually kind of failed my POC, but my MPLS was failing on the same part, and they were supposedly experts in this. And I went to them and like, hey, we block internet by default. We don't want the shop floor having access to the internet. Someone wasting their time, on midnight shift doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So we block it. Well, what would happen is executives and and engineers would move around from plant to plant and change from Ethernet to wireless. And what would happen is that using user awareness with the Active Directory controllers and DHCP, their IPs change, and then it would forget, and then they would get blocked. Very, very frustrating when you're leaving your desk, going into a conference room to do a meeting, and then you're blocked. And you're like, damn it, I need to get on this meeting. Everyone's waiting for me. So our original provider was failing at that. They failed that on the POC, and they said, hey, listen, work with us for the next couple weeks. We'll fix it. And really, they did, and they worked with me, and that's what sold me on it. Was they were able to adjust the code, fix it, and make it to what it is today. And I had input in the direction of the way it went, and that sold us. I mean, that I knew that they could fix and solve problems that they could see.
Yeah, and honestly, I think one of the biggest pitfalls that we want to cover too is the fact that, as you are transitioning a facility to SD-WAN, if it's an internet only SD-WAN solution, you've got other facilities that are on MPLS, they need a way to communicate, and you're going to have to hairpin that traffic through a data center or headquarters, some other facility. So there is that additional route that traffic has to take until that other facility is switched over to SD-WAN as well. So, you do want to make sure that your headquarters or data center has enough bandwidth to support that extra traffic that's going through that for the time being. And obviously, if you've got some routing protocols in there, you want to be able to support those or do static routes to ensure that the traffic knows how to get to everything else. You talk about voice, you want that to be site to site, and that new SD-WAN facility needs to understand how to get to that new site.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Nick. I just want to say, before I go to get to that comment, I'm going to give you two things that maybe are slightly different, non-technical things to be on the lookout for that I think our clients are running across. And that is, the first one is you need to have an understanding of exactly how to offboard your MPLS provider from a contractual perspective. Because sometimes these guys say, hey, your contract is up on November 1st, and then other times it's, well, your contract's up on November 1st, but these two sites are up in March, and these two sites are up next July. And you can't just look at a contract end date and say, yep, this is exactly when we're going to do it. You have to map out exactly when all of those contracts are up, so you know that you don't get dinged from
Yeah.
a penalty perspective. The second piece of that is if you are going from one provider handling all your connectivity, you may now end up having a dozen, 24 conversations with ISPs all across the United States, and there's different ways to do that. So you need to understand, do you want to go to an aggregation model where you just have one reseller that's going to be reselling all of these internet providers, or are you going to have all these conversations, or are you going to work with someone like a C3 to kind of broker all those conversations and bring to you all the results? So those aren't technical in nature, but I do think they need to be addressed if you're looking to make that move.
They definitely do. I mapped out all my contracts and end dates and made sure there was no evergreen clause in them. There was. I submitted my cancellations on time, saying, "Hey, I want this go to month, and get all those things worked out." Because you miss one of those dates, and then you're contractually obligated. I mean, that makes it really hard to go up to the CFO and go, "Yeah, I projected all these savings, but we missed this date, and now the carrier is trying to charge us for this cancellation." And I think that's where aggregators really help with those type of things, because they can help map all that out, and you guys have that negotiating power to help ding that down. But going back to the other question, Joe, the other thing that the pitfalls, one of the important things, if you're a manufacturer, which most of them are not necessarily all at this point because sometimes they're behind the curve, is if you're using SIP trunking or UCaaS or voice traffic over your WAN architecture, you just got to test that out, make sure that that works, and go through those things, because there's so many different ways RTP and SIP traffic's handled, and different carriers do things. You just really got to work on that and understand it. There's a little fine tuning when it comes to those really picky traffic configurations, but a lot of the providers out there, they know this stuff, and you communicate with them, and they can fine tune it and put in certain protocols and change things, and packet mitigation protocols to help reduce some of those things.
So Joe, we've got only a minute or two left. I want to hit just one quick question and maybe just kind of do a little lightning round response here. But Nick, we'll start with you on this. Why should automotive manufacturers evaluate SD-WAN and dump MPLS?
I mean, I'd say it's pay me now or pay me later. I mean, MPLS is going to go away. It's too expensive. All the MPLS carriers are carrying some sort of different SD-WAN, but they couldn't manage my MPLS very well. I couldn't trust them to manage that. So you're going to do it at some point, and I'd say take the savings and build it out now, because you're going to thank yourself once you've done it and get through the cutover and the work. It's going to be a little work. It's not the easy button on the solution. It depends how complex you are. It could be an easy button, but if you're complex, it could be it could be a year-long process if you want to do it with your team and not bring other people in and just get it done. But the cost savings and the power is there.
I want to hit on something too, as well as a lot of automotive suppliers have facilities in China. And when you talk about trying to get out of the country of China, you have to have that MPLS circuit, or you have to use an SD-WAN provider that has the capability of traversing the firewall. So when you look at POP-based SD-WAN solutions, you can now use that internet circuit in China to connect to that POP-based solution at a fraction of the cost. And you're still following the government guidelines of China and doing things right. So really, I think that's one of the best savings that we see, is you're getting way more bandwidth at a cheaper rate in countries like China. And that's really a godsend, I think, for some of the companies that we've worked for.
If you're international, I mean, huge savings right there going to it. And that's where you need to choose a SASE solution that has the global backbones to transmit your data on an SLA backbone to get it, backhaul it to the US, or take your traffic out. So with our cloud ERP system, other providers that we worked with, they had companies, they have MES system, ERP system in the US, but that's where the cloud stores. So they're backhauling those people off and offloading them in the US on a known good circuit all the way. So you're getting that MPLS benefit without paying for it.
Yeah. And you really have the capability of bringing those ERP systems or even things like O365, Azure, AWS closer to your environment for a better experience as well, no matter where you're at globally.
Yeah.
You know, one other thing I do want to point out one more thing. I know we're running out of time, but you know, what we're seeing is companies that are dealing in automotive are starving for bandwidth. You know, we talk about autonomous driving and the amount of data that's being collected. You can't replicate that. You can't collect that data over an MPLS circuit. You really need that high availability, high bandwidth of an internet circuit, maybe multiple circuits with multiple appliances to capture that data and replicate it where you need.
Well, that brings up, I forgot to mention, you know, one of the hugest, you know, things versus an MPLS was I got HA. You know, if I wanted HA with you know, my MPLS, that was a huge expense. SD-WAN, you know, was just another box put in there connected to my existing internet connections, you know, split off, and that was huge. Having that HA capability was a huge, and it was fractions of a cost for that security. And that was, you know, and it was a godsend having that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, especially if you've got, I mean, it's simple math. If you're doing HA, but you have a lot of plants out there, every year, several plants are just going to die. And if you're in the automotive space, like you talked about, the big guys are going to ding you. So you absolutely have to be up. So we're now at the 33-minute mark. I know we could probably do this webinar for an hour and a half, but we're going to keep this at 30 minutes. So Joe, I want to say thank you. Nick, I want to thank you as well. Nick, I think you believe in this space so much that you used to be an IT director in the automotive space, and you actually took a job with Cato Networks and actually doing this because you believed in it that much. So did you want to talk about that for a quick second?
I do. I mean, yeah. I mean, I had a great position at a great tier 1 automotive. I mean, it was a hard choice to leave. I mean, it was a great company, but you know, I believe in this technology so much that I made, you know, an opportunity came up to join Cato Networks to head up their product support for North America and Americas, just so you know, I could help bring that customer service and support that I've always gotten and maintain it for the future people that join the future of networking and security and SASE. I mean, it's now, you know, SASE wasn't even a word 3 years ago. Now it's a word, and that's what, you know, we were talking the other day, Matthew, and you're like, yeah, I'm starting to get those questions, not just on SD-WAN, and SD-WAN's getting bought up by you know, some of the bigger companies out there and bolting it on, and those bolt-ons, you know, they kind of work, but anytime you bolt things on, you know, you end up with a Frankenstein eventually. And you know, we've all built those Frankensteins in our networks, and they're hard to manage. And you know, where's the problem? Building something from the ground up, you know, it's always easier to build, you know, a new data center than it is try to refresh one and load it in, right, Joe?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, guys, I really appreciate the time today. Thank you. Hopefully our audience sees some value in this. I know there's a lot of automotive suppliers that are somewhere in that journey, and hopefully they can take a couple of pieces away from this and helping them make their own decisions. So thank you so much, guys. Much appreciate the time today.
Bye-bye.